So, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to address the question of freedom of speech in Sweden and how it is being eroded in front of our eyes, and the struggle for freedom of speech in Sweden. Reading from the Guardian newspaper dated Thursday the 27th of July 2023. The Swedish Prime Minister, Ulf Kristersson, has said that he is extremely worried about the consequences if more demonstrations go ahead in which the Quran is desecrated, amid growing Muslim anger at a series of attacks on Islam's holy book. Attacks on the Quran in Sweden and Denmark have offended many Muslim countries, including Turkey, whose backing Sweden needs to join NATO, a goal of Stockholm after Russia's invasion of the Ukraine. Kristersson told the Swedish news agency that further requests had been filed with police for permission to hold protests where desecration of the Quran was again being planned. If they are granted, we are going to face some days where there is a clear risk of something serious happening, he said. I am extremely worried about what it could lead to. Brother, is it all right if I get a drink of water?
The other way.
Sweden's embassy in Baghdad was stormed and set on fire on the 20th of July by protesters angered by a planned Quran burning. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the issue that is occurring is that a Christian from Iran protesting the persecution of Christians in Iran decided to burn a Quran in Sweden. And this created uproar and anger across the Muslim world. Funnily enough, the Muslim world was not bothered by the fact that Christians were being persecuted in Iran, that Christians are being hanged in Iran, imprisoned in Iran, that churches during their acts of worship are being stormed in Iran. No, they're offended by the burning of a book. Ladies and gentlemen, the elites of Europe, in their response to this, have condemned the burning of Qurans in the strongest possible terms. So, for example, reading from the newspaper political period Politico, we read that the EU's foreign policy chief, Joseph Borrell, on Wednesday condemned recent Quran burnings in Denmark and Sweden, burning the Islamic holy book, quote, "It's offensive and disrespectful and a clear provocation. Tolerance for religious communities are key values of the EU, and expressions of racism and xenophobia and related intolerance have no place here," the top diplomat said. Now, ladies and gentlemen, where was his voice when Christians in Pakistan this week had churches torn into, crosses ripped from buildings, Bibles desecrated, and 138 homes of Christians were pillaged and rampaged through? Where was Chief Joseph Borrell in his condemnation of that anti-Christian pogrom in Pakistan? He was nowhere to be seen because he did not care. And why is it that the EU and its diplomats only care about the burnings of Qurans in Sweden and Denmark, but don't care about 138 Christian families that were forced from their homes in an anti-Christian pogrom in which 6 churches were burned and vandalised, and the EU chief foreign representative had nothing to say about it. I'll tell you why, ladies and gentlemen. Because the elites of the EU are filled with progressive hypocrites who talk about religious tolerance whilst turning a consistent blind eye to the persecution of Christians in every part of the Islamic world without exception. If you don't believe me, Google any Muslim majority country you like and just type in church persecution in country X and you will be able to find examples where Christians are being persecuted. Ladies and gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen,
that worships one God is getting wrecked right now by the Satanists.
let's be clear.
I don't like Satanists, they're really nasty.
Correct. Well done.
Let's be clear. What happened?
You're going to find it eventually, right?
There were groups that spoke up for those persecuted Christians, such as the Independent Human Rights Commission of Pakistan, which condemned the anti-Christian pogrom. And the EU ambassador to Pakistan said that this anti-Christian pogrom was not an example of EU values and tolerance. However, the mooted, whitewashed, watered down condemnation by the EU of this anti-Christian pogrom should alert all of us to the fact, and especially Christians from Europe, that EU institutions do not care about Christians. This is one of the reasons why I personally supported Brexit. And it's one of the reasons why I call on Christians in Germany, France, and Italy to achieve their own independence from these corrupt, intimidated, whitewashing, spineless liberal cowards who consistently turn a blind eye to persecution of Christians in the Islamic world. Ladies and gentlemen, why the double standard? Why do they care more about the burning of a book over the attacks on 138 Christian homes and 6 churches? Why? Because the EU elites and the elites of the British government are cowards who are intimidated by the prospect of Islamic violence emerging from the Islamic community.
Okay, just so you know, the EU are against you, but the Muslims are not.
Ladies and gentlemen,
Hate the violence against
leaders who cannot stand up for you are no leaders at all.
We never burn churches.
And that includes any bishop, of which the vast majority have been silent, ladies and gentlemen, about the persecution of Christians. All of you who have been to church this Sunday, how many of you heard about this anti-Christian pogrom in Pakistan?
You had your sexual problem.
How many of you heard about it on BBC broadcasting?
Do you like to beat up legends?
The reality is the liberal elites are intimidated by the threat of Islamic violence, and that is why they will condemn the burning of a Quran in Sweden but are silent about anti-Christian pogroms in Pakistan
Well, maybe
because they are afraid.
maybe it's got to do with which phone you're.
And many of you are also afraid. Ladies and gentlemen, there is nothing morally wrong with burning a Quran if you are burning the Quran to make a political protest. If you're burning a Quran just to offend, then I stand with those who condemn you. But if you are burning a Quran to raise awareness about persecuted Christians, then that is correct political expression under the terms of freedom of speech. There is nothing sacred about the Quran. There are no blasphemy laws for Islam. But yet, by their cowardice, our liberal elites are establishing in the laws of Europe blasphemy laws for one religion in particular, Islam.
What a load of bullshit.
It will not take you very long to Google search to find desecrations of the Bible in Western Europe that go unpunished and uncondemned by the same elites and the same media elites who are condemning the burning of a Quran in Sweden and Denmark. They support this expression of freedom of speech when Bibles are being desecrated. They are limp-wristed in their condemnation of the burnings of churches in France and in Pakistan and the persecution of Christians across the Islamic world.
Can you believe
So, Christians,
homophobic crap?
can you see
No.
no one has our back?
Can you believe that?
No one is standing up for the Christians.
Have you got a gun?
So what must we do, ladies and gentlemen?
No, yeah.
What must we do?
The guy's got.
We must follow what the scriptures teach us to do. Don't feed the trolls with your attention. They're only here because no one will listen to them if they go somewhere else and speak. We must cling to apostolic teaching and to put it in practice. Let me give you an example. Hebrews 13:3. Continue to remember those in prison as if you were together with them in prison, and those who are mistreated as if you yourselves were suffering. As Christians, we are commanded to feel the pain and the sufferings of our brothers and sisters across the Islamic world who are being persecuted under Sharia law and under Islamic mob violence, as in Pakistan.
You're an attention seeker.
We must identify with their suffering. We cannot say to ourselves that the Christians in Pakistan are too far away for us to care about. We cannot say that the sufferings of the church in Pakistan are not our concern as Christians in the English-speaking world. No, ladies and gentlemen, we must find our voice. We must find our ability to speak up for our persecuted brethren. Now, ladies and gentlemen, since it is clear that our bishops and our politicians are totally incompetent to the task, we must not wait upon them to organize ourselves to help the persecuted church. This movement of solidarity must come from the laity of the church. The average man and woman in the pew must organize themselves, fellowship by fellowship, parish by parish, diocese by diocese, into networks of solidarity to offer the support to the persecuted church that our bishops are not doing. We must condemn those bishops for their silence. And why are they silent? because they are slaves of a false political dogma that prizes communal peace in the Western world over solidarity against the persecutors of the church, both abroad and their apologists here in the UK.
That are not Muslims
Because, ladies and gentlemen,
if they're doing this.
because, ladies and gentlemen, they are afraid and they are cowards. What does it say in Scripture? It says in Hebrews 32 to 38, remember those earlier days after you had received the light, when you endured in a great conflict full of suffering? Sometimes you were publicly exposed to insult and persecution. At other times, you stood side by side with those who were so treated. Lots of Christians say that we want to be like the first Christians. Well, the first Christians stood side by side with those who suffer in the name of Christ.
And didn't worship Christ.
And that means, ladies and gentlemen, that as Christians, we must not care for the peace of England if the peace of England is bought at the price of the persecution and the blood of our brothers and sisters around the world in the Islamic world. We must stand up for them. We must stand against the apologists who try to whitewash their suffering. And if that results in increased communal tensions or conflict in England, so be it.
So you hate Islam?
Because the price of peace
Trying to help you.
is being bought at the blood of the martyrs. And we as Christians cannot tolerate or pay such a price. We must follow the apostolic teachings no matter the cost.
No Muslim burns the church.
No matter,
No Muslim.
no matter, ladies and gentlemen, what it costs us. We must raise the voice for the persecuted church. We must thrust this issue into the eyes and the face of every progressive hypocrite that talks about tolerance, that talks about inclusion, and is silent about persecuted Christians because they have been indoctrinated by a politique that is anti-Christian. Christians, find your voice. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let me debate my heckler on this issue and listen how he seeks to defend the persecution of Christians in the Islamic world. Listen how he attempts to change the subject.
Okay.
One final point. Muslims are offended because the Quran is being burned. Muslims for 1400 years have desecrated churches of Christians and other religious symbols of other religions, and the first and chief of them to do so was their own prophet, who destroyed pagan idols except one in the Kaaba. We cannot take lectures from Muslims. We cannot take lectures from Muslims about respecting other people's religions when for 1400 years they have been persecuting Christians, Jews and others and desecrating their symbols and places of worship.
False.
Ladies and gentlemen,
Lies.
as Christians, we cannot condemn smashing false idols like the Quran
Abraham did it. Peace be upon
when, exactly as he's just said, Abraham and the prophets also destroyed the idols of false religions, and so did our saints. The only criticism that as a Christian we can raise about this issue is about whether it is wise. And it is only on those grounds that I myself would never desecrate a Quran, because I don't want other people to desecrate the Bible or a Christian church. Not because it's morally wrong, but because it is unwise.
So it's breaking idols.
I'm going to debate you in a second. Any questions, ladies and gentlemen? Let me take questions from the crowd and then I'll debate you. Go on.
Are we certain that Abraham actually destroyed idols? Since it is the hadith that are saying
No, it's in the Quran.
So, ladies and gentlemen, the reply to the question is, in the Bible, we do not see Abraham destroying idols. But in the Bible, we do see the prophets of God mocking pagan religion. God himself mocks pagan religion, and the prophets and the kings of Israel do destroy pagan idols. Paul, when he converted people away from paganism, the Christians gathered together the books that were owned by pagans converted to Christianity and burned the pagan books. Our saints have destroyed pagan idols. And for that reason, a Christian cannot say it is morally wrong to burn a Quran if they are doing so to protest against the persecution of Christians or to demonstrate the lack of value that the Quran has as a spiritual book. It only has value as a piece of medieval literature, and for those reasons I would argue that it should be respected. Any other questions?
Just so you know, Abraham and the idol shop.
Any other questions? I'm taking questions, ladies and gentlemen.
Just so you know, that is basically.
Any other questions, ladies and gentlemen? Questions going once about this issue? Go on. So, ladies and gentlemen, what's happened in Pakistan this week? A Christian colony. There was found at the borders of a Christian colony some pages of the Quran that were desecrated. Suspiciously, these pages were found on the edge of a Christian colony. Now, why would Christians desecrate a Quran and then put the evidence on the edge of their own colony when they know what the result of such an action would be? That's your first clue, ladies and gentlemen, that they're being set up. But notice the Muslim apologist for the persecution of Christians instantly jumped on the idea that the Christians were trying to provoke the Muslims. Go and look at the geopolitics of Pakistan and ask yourself if that idea makes sense. But it makes sense in the minds of the bigots. It makes sense in the minds of the Islamists. It makes sense in the minds of the apologists for the persecution of Christians. Secondly, that evidence was discovered, surprise, surprise, by Muslims who just happened to walk by where the evidence was placed. Those Muslims then went back to their Muslim mosque, and the mosques, the imams, called for the Christians to be punished.
According to who?
No evidence was provided that Christians desecrated the Quran. It could just be a trouble causer from the Muslims who was driven by hatred of Christians. A Muslim mob then marched in to that Christian colony, destroying and pillaging 6 churches and 134 homes, businesses, forcing the Christians to flee. Ladies and gentlemen, that is what happened in Pakistan, a place where Christians regularly suffer anti-Christian pogroms. Ladies and gentlemen, What needs to happen in Pakistan is for the Christians to gather into one city, all 2 million of them. And when they form the majority in that city, they set up their own security service. They set up their own independent, off-the-radar militia to defend them, because the Pakistani state is not defending the Christians. Because of Islamic prejudice, they are seen as the kuffar, the dhimmi, and they are not seen as being worthy of equal status in Pakistan. Any other questions, ladies and gentlemen?
Not much evidence out over here.
Questions going once?
Take your time, mate. They have a lot of questions here. Look at all the questions. It's so-
Questions going twice? Now notice my Muslim heckler,
yeah, I'm waiting.
he's here to heckle and mock because I'm speaking up against an attack against hundreds of Christians. That tells you his mindset. These are the people that we have allowed into our country. These are the people that we need to kick out of our country.